Ooh, that's good. I love pumpkin spice latte season. As I'm going into my final year of college, I started thinking about what I'm gonna do after graduation. Originally, I wanted to be photographing concerts and festivals full time, but with the state of the world, we have no idea when concerts are coming back. So because of that, I've kind of shifted my whole perspective, and now I'm kind of thinking about being a digital retoucher in Photoshop. Now, as you probably know, the most important thing for artists when getting hired is their portfolio. Now, I do have some images that I think that could work, in mine, but when applying for jobs, you just want to make sure that your work is the best that it can be. So since graduation is a couple months away, I thought that every week I do a composite in Photoshop. That way, down the line when I am building my portfolio, I'll have tons of images to choose from. Alright, so starting out is the background. It is a plain blue sky, and that's just because I want it to be as neutral and non-distracting from the actual subject matter as possible. So to get the rough outline of kind of how my skyline would look, I was started cutting out the buildings that I wanted to put in there, and to start I kind of just used the quick object select tool, which does a pretty good job because it is automated. It does save some time, but it's not always perfect. So from there I did this selected mask tool and fixed the selections to kind of include everything that I wanted from the building, and then from there I made a mask so that I could easily, paint or get rid of parts from the building that I didn't want in a non-destructive way. And I did spend a good amount of time on my selections, even though they didn't have to be perfect because the objects weren't going to be really big, so you couldn't really tell if I made a small mistake or not. But for me, I just think it's really good practice to try and make everything as good as you can make it. So when placing the buildings for my skyline, I wanted to make sure, that they were kind of all similar sizes and one wasn't, a lot bigger than the other, and also kind of make sure the perspective was right and warp them and kind of transform them if I needed to. So going into this, I knew that I wanted to put a bridge kind of in between the two of my main buildings, and I kind of wanted it without the tower parts because I thought, those would be distracting, and I just kind of wanted, the cable lines that connect to the bridge and to the buildings themselves. But then when I actually put the image into mine, it didn't look great. It kind of looked weird. It was, well, it's like you couldn't really tell it was a bridge, or if you could, it just really just looked awkward or weird. So then I decided, it's a bridge. Everyone knows that bridges have the tower parts. Might as well just leave them in. So after I had a couple buildings in, I kind of decided that I didn't like this one on the far right because it didn't fit in with the other ones. The other ones are kind of, more square and kind of industrial, while this one kind of looked very modern and very cool, and it just wouldn't fit in with the rest. And then after doing a bunch of individual buildings, I decided to put in a little small building clump to kind of put in front of the taller buildings to kind of give it some more depth of field and perspective, and not just having these huge skyscrapers throughout the image. And then also going in, I knew I wanted this really tall, skyscraper with a helipad on it, kind of like the Stark and Avengers Tower from the Marvel movies. So luckily, there was a real building that looks like that, so I found it and was able to put it in my skyline. And then I kind of just wanted the helipad building to make it look like it could be attached to the L-shaped building, but really that would just be the way it looked from the perspective that, that this would have been taking at. So at this point I started to have a lot of layers, so I decided to name them so that I can easily, tell which building is which and not be wasting time trying to find the building that I'm looking for. And then from there, I started to fine tune the laying more, change the perspective on some of the buildings, make them bigger or smaller, and then also clean up the selections as well, just, trying to dial them in and make them perfect. And then, buildings that I didn't, like because they were blocking too much of other ones, I also got rid of those. And then because of the mask and because they are non-destructive, I could easily remove the buildings that I didn't like, and unlike the eraser tool and having to press undo because you made a mistake, or later on you change your mind and you decide you actually like that building and you can't really go back anymore, you can easily fix things because of the non-destructive nature of masks, which is why I prefer to use them. And then after I got rid of those two buildings, you could clearly see that part of my angle building is missing because, you know, the image I selected it from, it wasn't even there to begin with. So at first I thought, you know, I just copied the part of the building up top that is there, but then I didn't like how that was looking out. So I just decided to use the clone stamp tool, and it worked out pretty well. For the small circle one, I wanted it to look like it was behind the taller one. So when I was, you know, painting away parts of the building, I was being careful because I didn't want them to be, you know, overlapping anymore. And then I also didn't want to have any sky showing. So I was, you know, taking a while, you know, to paint the stuff away and in. But then kind of halfway through, I realized like, oh, I don't need to be, you know, perfecting it and spending all this time when I could just use, you know, the selection from the taller building, you know, activate that, and then anything that I paint from the smaller circle one, it won't go on to the taller one because of the selection. Then I use the spot remover tool to get rid of the light posts that are on the L building and the helipad building because, you know, this high up there aren't going to be any light posts. So after all the buildings were done, I started fixing the bridge and changing the perspective of it, the scale, and then even warping some of it as well. And then at first I thought about keeping the wires and just trying to get rid of the white parts that are showing through from the sky from the previous image. But then when I zoomed out all the way, you couldn't even really see the wires. So it would have been a lot of time wasted for nothing. So I really just ended up getting rid of the wires. And then I just copied the end parts of the bridge and kind of made it look like it was really, you know, sticking out of the building. So then after I was happy with the layout, I started to match the brightnesses of the buildings to match the tallest ones with level adjustments layers, and I did that for each and every building. And then after that was done, I started to add the neon signs to the buildings, and I just cut them out the same way I did with the buildings with masks, and then I just scaled them to fit the size of the buildings. So I got most of the images from pexels.com, so they were all high resolution images, and even though I did scale them down, I would have had the option if I wanted to make them bigger, which is a really nice thing and why I enjoy using pexels so much. After I got the codex sign in place, I did get rid of another building from the clump because I wanted to see more of the gap between the black and the angled building as well because I thought it looked better that way. Then after a couple of signs, I started to add the futuristic spaceships that I did find on Google. And, you know, the bad thing about, you know, sometimes getting your images off of Google is that they are really small, and if you wanted to make them bigger, it would just ruin the image and make them really pixelated. So again, that is why I preferred, you know, to look at pixels first, and then if I don't find something there, I'll use Google as a last resort. So the first spaceship, I scaled it and kind of, you know, fixed the perspective of it to make it look like it was resting on the helipad. And again, kind of why I choose the helipad building, because I knew I was going to put a ship on it later on. Then I added another ship under the bridge, and this one, I made it look like it was flying. Then I added some drop shadows to the ship on the helipad and the signs to make them, you know, really look like they were actually, you know, there and they have the shadow and everything. And then it took me a while to decide on another sign to add to the image. Then I finally, you know, decided on this Husset one. But kind of, you know, at first I thought about getting rid of the building that is behind the letters. But then, you know, when zoomed out and, you know, with the building gone, it is kind of hard to read the sign itself. So I just decided to keep the building in because you can't even really tell it's there when zoomed out. After I had all the buildings, signs, and ships that I wanted in, I started to color correct everything to the tallest building so that all the colors would match and it would look a lot more realistic instead of just a bunch of buildings and signs kind of thrown together in an image. So I did the color correction for the black building first, and then because it would be the same for everything else, I just copied the curves layer and then I attached it to every object in the image. Then after everything was color corrected, I started to fix the shadows and highlights on everything to match with the directions of the shadows and highlights that appear on the tallest building. For the shadows, I just painted them in with a low opacity black brush, and then the highlights, I used a mix of curves, level, and brightness / contrast adjustments. I also added another ship to the top left of the image because I didn't think I had enough ships, and you can never have too many spaceships in your image. I then darkened and changed the color of the sky a little bit because I didn't really like how bright it looked and I thought it was a little too distracting from the buildings. So then after everything looked the way I wanted it to, I made a merge layer, and from there it would be, more difficult to go back and make changes. And then, on the L building, to fix these shadows, I used a frequency separation action that I have, and then with the mixture brush, I just painted the windows darker to match. Then I wanted to add some clouds to my image, so I used a cloud shape brush to add a lot of clouds, and then with a soft eraser, I got rid of them to make them softer and more realistic, not just look like a bunch of harsh clouds that were obviously painted into the image. Once I had the clouds all set, I added and mixed a bunch of LUTs to kind of give it a somewhat colorful, futuristic / bleak look. And then from there, I really thought I was done with the image, but then I slept on it and kind of knew that I needed to add more signs and ships to it. And then I also thought, why not add a satellite as well? And here is the final result. So yeah, that was me making my city skyline composite. I think it turned out pretty well, which I'm very happy about. And then obviously I enjoyed making it as well, which is always the most important part. So I'm hoping to do 1 to 2 types of videos like this every month, kind of just, to show my process and why I do the things that I do when I'm making a composite, and kind of also just hopefully as a way to show how much, I have improved from where I'm starting right now until when hopefully I will be a full-time digital retoucher.